terror. And people will then fear and they go like, oh, the demon has gotten to me. And that, especially if they come from still a religious program. But in the Bible, it also says that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. So like, which one is it? Is it the devil or is it God that's causing this fear? And it's technically both. And the catch is that once you have moved through this experience into the space of another consciousness, a consciousness that creates reality, or that level of your own consciousness, then you are in the space where thoughts become things. And to be in the space where thought becomes things, the experience of fear is when the energy of the Kundalini hits the cerebellum and it stimulates the various supporting areas of the brain, the amygdala specifically. The stimulation of the amygdala as a result of this, what we call the God part of the brain, creates this fear and this terror that happens in the body. This is very much the exact same way as Timothy Leary wrote about the psychedelic experience in correlation to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That fear is the fear of God. It's the beginning of knowledge.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic, the world of the spirits, and everything in between. In this episode, I sit down with Adam Nox for an in-depth discussion on the rich subject matter of his excellent new book, The Cult of Two, the uncensored sexual magic teachings of the Order of Delirious Saints. Grounded in esoteric traditions and cutting-edge psychological insights, this compelling guide offers a roadmap to navigate the complexities of love, power, and identity. The Cult of Two is more than a book, it's an invitation to transform your life through the integration of sexuality, spirituality, and self-mastery. In the conversation, we explore the importance of integrating our fears, desires, and addictions, as well as the dangers of using spiritual knowledge as a shield against real growth. Adam shares his insights on the unconscious mind, the deeper meaning within the tarot, and how magic and psychotherapy can work together. We also discuss the roles of somatics in spiritual practice, the risk of Kundalini awakening, and the power of self-acceptance in navigating altered states of consciousness. From exploring the tree of life and the dark arts to personal stories of navigating danger through human connection, this conversation takes us deeper into the realms of esoteric wisdom and self-mastery. In the Plus Show, we go even further, taking a deep dive into the mysteries of the Tree of Death, examining its role in spiritual transformation, its relationship to the shadow self, and how working with its energies can lead to profound personal insight. And I found this hugely informative, and I think you will too. So join us as we explore the intersection of magic, science, and the unconscious mind. This is an episode packed with insight, challenge, and practical wisdom. As always, you can find the link to pick your copy of the book up in the show notes and the link to Adam's site, The Cult of You. If you want to hear the Plus Show, the simple thing to do is to go to the show notes, go to my link tree, and come and join the Patreon. You can buy an individual episode. Some of the later ones, I've more recent ones, you can buy individually, or you can sign up to be a patron, which is the most bang for your buck, really. You get the plus shows of the released public shows. You also get other bonus shows and access to a whole other podcast, which is the Nameless podcast with Tommy Kelly and I, which can only be found on my Patreon and Tommy's Patreon. So if that floats your boat, then do come and have a look. If Patreon isn't your thing and you'd still like to support me, then you can always pick up a copy of my book, Song of the Dark Man, Folder of Witches, and the link to that you can find in the link tree as well. Okay, that's it from me. Let's get on with the show. So, Adam Nox, you are very welcome to the Spirit Box, and nice to see you again.
It's good. It's good to be on the other side of this conversation for once. I've loved our last one. I'm looking forward to what you think of my book, for a change.
Well, I literally just finished your book last night in preparation for the show today. Really enjoyed it. Really, really rich. And we'll get into that today. But for Thanks. People who may not be familiar with you or your work, could you give them a little bit of an introduction and about you and what you do?
Yeah, sure. I mean, short bits of it. I'm obviously an occult author officially. This is my first work, but I've been an occult teacher for probably 3 decades. Hitting on now. Mostly worked in various arenas from Freemasonry to the Dragon Rouge to the Golden Dawn to spiritualist communities and a variety of other different groups. Focused a lot on neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, various forms of personal development technology. So I was actively teaching in private, or first public, then went private because at the end of the day, the technology became too advanced, I think, magically, and it started posing a risk to people that had the ability to abuse it, and people getting knowledge of a further level and causing harm to themselves. So I pulled out of the public for a long time, focused on my work with the Order of Delirious Saints that I talk about in the book. And then after a friend of mine prompted me about all the misinformation that was out there in the area, I started the Cult of You podcast. We did that for about 3 years when I brought that out. And the book was kind of like the conclusion of that. I felt like with that program, I put out all the knowledge. The site's still available. But as of the time of this conversation, I'm closing down all the social media footprints, going back to the dark. But there is at least now a website and a book for people that want to learn and take the process with me.
Fantastic, thank you for that. I noticed. I noticed that you've deleted your spaces on social, which I commend. I'm quite an admirer of that move. I think it's a power move. Was it just kind of projects wrapped and now it's time to move on to something else?
I was thinking about kind of bringing the project to a close because I think all the essential information that I needed to bring to the public was there. And to be honest, I think when you practice the arts, it gives you a lot of success in other areas. And a lot of those have just taken on dominance. I feel the core technologies for people to learn the steps to achieve the success in their own life, that was made available. Those that were interested, they took it. There is a platform now to it. And again, I've seen too many people. There's conversations like yours and mine where you discuss somebody that's had a real supernatural event or series of events. And there's I love the lucidity of that conversation. Somebody actually commented on the show, on the episode that we put out, that they really appreciated how lucid and how aware everyone was in the conversation. And I think the caveat is there's a lot in social media, TikTok, YouTube, even other platforms, where it's not about the authenticity, where people use the concept of spirituality and magic far more as a way to, shall I say, scapegoat their own areas. Instead of dealing with it, they put the power in spirit. They put the power in some kind of elusive enemy like the Illuminati or the devil or Jesus or whatever it is. And I don't want to have people like that get information that is kind of reserved for more experienced individuals, more sincere individuals, and then cause more harm to themselves. I think a little bit of information is dangerous. And I've gotten to the point where I said, I still want to keep it. I'm still making it available, but there needs to be a stage progress to it. And at the other hand, I have no financial incentive on the cult and on the esoteric and on the spiritual. I do very well for myself and my businesses. The cult of you is, here's the technology. Here's how I do it. Here's my spiritual path. Here's the mysteries. Here's the clarification of misrepresented ideas. And if someone's sincere, it's available still on the website. But it was fundamentally just to the point where, like you said, work is done. Now I can be extra responsible because responsible occultism was always a philosophy of mine. It was a core principle. And I just realized that if I'm going to start chasing the hits, if I'm going to start constantly trying to get more ratings, I'm going to probably be watering down the quality of the work. And I'm going to expose it to more people that are not ready for it in terms of interpretation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's I credit to you. I think that's a very strong mindset. That's very valuable to people, really. And you touch on that in the book. You touch on kind of like warnings of, if you advance in this area too quickly without reconciliation of of shadow elements or other other kind of components that need development in order to kind of move through down and up. The kind of the tree of life and the tree of death that you talk about in the book. You could do, or one could do oneself more harm than good, which is again, it's valuable. It's valuable to people, and it seems like kind of that prompted you not only to kind of embark on the project of the podcast, but it also was kind of a driver to, I guess, dispel a lot of that kind of disinformation, but also distill your 30 years of practice and teaching into something. And to that end, you've achieved that goal, and you're going to take the kind of the next step in your own journey. What do you want people to take away from the book?
I think there's a couple of core kind of ideas. And I think just before I mention like what those are, I mean, actually, no, let me start there. I think there's core ideas. Firstly, that the traditional ideas of sex magic is misinterpreted in many areas, where people confuse it purely as an act of pleasure and a tool of manipulation sometimes. And that leads to serious long-term damage if done that way. Because fundamentally, the identity of the individual is established through the relationship that we have with pain and pleasure. And if this is misconfigured, someone's practicing erotic magic, and there's a manipulative element to it, there's a psychologically unhealthy element to it, we're going to reinforce these patterns. And if we then combine that simple psychological thing that's not usually an issue now with ceremonial magic and the invocation and the working with entities and gods, then it becomes a formula for psychosis. So there is a very specific path, and it's hidden behind our actual desires. Like your desire for that person, your desire for more money, for more sex, for more things, is not a desire at all. It's the awareness of spiritual potentials that exist within your unconscious right now. And the problem is not your relationship with the outside or your lack of education or your looks or any of that. It is your relationship with that archetype within and you being dissonant from it. And the process that was defined in the old initiatory orders was one that brings us into resonance with that and heals this divide psychologically that we have with the deepest regions of the unconscious, the superconscious, and essentially the realms of the spirit and the shared realm with each other. And if we don't heal that first, no matter what we're doing on the outside, it's not going to really work. We're going to push, maybe we'll get lucky, but we'll never have control over the playing field, because until we change, the world doesn't change. So I think that's a core idea. The book is an art of the transformation of the self. It assumes that we are the shapeshifter, and for us to achieve anything, we must shapeshift into alignment with the things that we want. And it describes the process of it not just being money, but instead of money, it's a manifestation or an attribute perhaps of Jupiter. Instead of art or love, it may be an attribute of Venus, and identifying these fundamental archetypes that is common to all of mankind, and then changing that relationship. And that's it. You don't need to follow specific cosmology. If you do, you can. Much as the original translation of the Abramelin that said, if you were a Christian, be a Christian. If you're a Jew, be a Jew. Do not violate the initial premise. And it's the idea of whatever the cosmology is that is the root of your reality must be evolved, not just discarded. Because otherwise we're running two competing programs within ourselves, which produces dissonance again. And this is what I call the duality effect. So whenever we're in this yin and yang and pain and pleasure and male and female and good and bad, we are inside of that. And this is akin to eating of the tree of good and evil. And that's that duality. That's the first thing we must resolve in order to achieve transcendence, so we're not subject to slavery of conditioned personality. So it's an art of liberation in that sense. It takes into consideration all these different technologies. It brings in things like attachment theory, how does secure attachment play, how does polyvagal theory work in terms of occultism, and what were these things. So it does a lot of work I think, in marrying modern psychotherapies and healing practices and technologies with these ancient systems in a cohesive way. So if the other part or the other goal is that if a lot of these ideas like Kabbalah, like ceremonial magic, like shamanic BDSM and shape shifting and evocation was obscure for somebody, hopefully through this they'll understand not only that it's fairly simple and achievable, but it's something you've probably been doing at an unconscious level all this time. And all that magic is learning to consciously become this magician that you've been, creating your reality. And, as to the comment earlier about the personal experience, when I was, 18, 17, I was doing pretty well for myself in spirituality. I discovered a lot of different wonderful things. And the ultimate gift that I received from spirit was a complete breakdown in the system. And the core reason for that is because I entered spirituality from I wouldn't say the woke community, but from the love and light community approach. And as much as that was beautiful, don't get me wrong, as much as there was this desire to serve mankind, as much as I was developed very actively in psychic abilities, at the time I was traveling the country doing clairvoyance and mediumship training with large groups of people at a very effective level, there was a very strong disconnect between my inner world and my outer world. And the reason for this is because that paradigm, at the same root of having this we're all one, think outside of the box, would shame sexuality. It would shame the body. It would shame any manifestation of shadow characteristics in a human being. Again, repeating this concept of dissonance. And it also would shame the education of things like the devil, the dark, song, the dark archetype, and all of these without the willingness to explore it. And that led me to a failure at an early age because my lower chakras were not developed enough to do something of meaning with this insight I was getting from the upper centers. So I was getting the wisdom, the inspiration, the job idea, the company, the relationship thing I should approach, the thing I should start, but I didn't have the capacity to produce or get into those networks. I didn't have the relationship with my body to sustain it because everything was the spirit and the flesh was bad. And that crash opened me up psychically at such a level that it physically impacted other human beings around me to the point where people would collapse if they were in a certain proximity to my energy field. And again, we're all known non-local. And if we open these parts, it's affecting everyone's unconscious. And it took me the recognition the temple has to be built from the foundation up. The relationship with sexuality, not as something that I need. And this is where a phrase I say often, one must seek surrender and not release. Because the typical approach we have to sexuality is, I need to release. The same thing as hunger. I need to release this tension. But the fact of the matter is that tension is the magnetic energy that starts to generate in the body. And if we instead surrender to it and we let go of the need, because the need demonstrates a weakness in our identity. It shows that our association or the things that we believe will make us whole is independent of ourselves. When that person gives it to me, when that initiation grants it to me, when I get into that group or in that company or by that status. And anything, we know we're victims of that when we find ourselves in need and not in surrender or allowing. And that was a difficult thing for me to recognize. So that's definitely something that prompted me, because I realized my own magic was sabotaged from it. I could practice to bring more joy and more happiness or more success in my life, but I would get the counter because, as noted in the philosophy of stress and trauma, when we have a trauma in the body, we tend to recreate circumstances in order to release the trauma. So if there's a narrative inside of ourselves of victimization, of not enough, of the world's against me in any way, shape, or form, and whatever the narrative is we use to justify that, because the narrative exists and is accepted by the unconscious, what I refer to as the entry of the hidden God, then it becomes the law of our universe. Unless we're doing that work, it doesn't matter what we're doing on the outside.
Fascinating, fascinating. And again, I think it's just hugely relevant. I mean, I say hugely relevant. I find it hugely relevant. It struck an awful lot of chords with me. Some of them that aren't easy to acknowledge. Which was like, oh yeah, I think yeah, okay, yeah, I recognize some of my own failings and areas of development. As you were describing them, which is, I guess, what it's supposed to do, right?
Yeah, bring about that thing, that hidden thing.
Yeah, yeah. And you talked about kind of like the body being kind of ready, and kind of like the nervous system being ready, and being more aware of your body, aware of your nervous system, and also acknowledging the body, which I really liked. I mean, that thing of kind of like spirit is good, body is bad. That whole dualistic, idea is even today still really, really quite potent. Even though we see ourselves as being kind of in a very kind of, I guess, liberal time around sexuality, we still have an awful lot of kind of like taboos and kind of third rails. When it comes to how we perceive ourselves, but and the importance of the body in our practices. And I found that really, really interesting, and something that I will take away. Because you managed to kind of get that balance of being able to kind of gently, yet quite deliberately point out, no, this is the work, right? Like this is the stuff that has to be done in order for things to function, and here are the reasons why. Which I don't think there's not a lot out there that actually lands that message in such a clear way. And you ground it in biology, you ground it in kind of in various different kind of forms of like psychology, and what have you, and that, I think, it gives it a really good shell, a really good shape to it. I'm waffling at you about your own book.
I like it. I like it. I mean, positive thoughts is always good, but you raise essential points. I think I loved that. One of the things that I enjoyed about your work is that you didn't just go and say, here's the dark horse. It was a song, it was an artistic, and it was a folklorish. You were looking at the mythologies, you were looking at the stories, and you were kind of saying, here's the data. Here's people's experience, here's historical references. These are my opinions, make your own up. But it wasn't just a statement of saying, there's this dark force and it's this thing, and here's a couple of rituals to it. And it's not that I'm discrediting a lot of authors that just do that, but I think what it ignores, or what it does, is it casts a larger veil on occultism, making it impractical. And there's that old classic phrase of mastery, right? If you really have mastered something, if you really have walked that place, if you really have initiated into that knowledge, you should be able to explain it to a 10-year-old. Right? So if there's always just a mystery and it can't be repeated, because that's what occult science was. Occult science is a hidden science. So in other words, it should adhere to the same principles to a degree. Right? It may not be limited by the same recording devices, right? In the same measuring tools, because again, there are certain areas of the quantum field and of the unconscious that we could possibly not just measure. We're starting to, right? I mean, we have tools today by which we can measure electromagnetic field changes in the room and in the individual. We can measure the changes of chakras. We can measure the changes of energy fields. We can measure brain waves, heart rate variability. All of these things we can put on somebody, and we can track when they're performing these rituals. By the way, selfish plug, in a long time from now, like a year or two, I'm working on another piece that goes into depth with that, to really explore that kind of stuff. But I think the core idea here is that, I mean, don't get me wrong, this book is probably not going to be picked up based upon the cover alone by somebody that is also reading a book on a scientific journal, or the casual housewife. I don't think, but that's because I've got to be congruent with the subject matter. But at the end of the day, it is to help recognize that this is a technology, right? This is a spiritual technology. And yes, there are intelligences involved in it that sometimes go beyond the conscious mind. That's the same way as there's intelligences involved in any company, in any group, in any working. This is just part of the nature of reality. But when we start to recognize this concept of how somatics looks at it, how we look at it as Magick as a communication language between the conscious and the collective unconscious and the unconscious and these phases between it. And we adopt this notion of that a dimension of ourself is transcendent and that it has far more vast levels of consciousness. And I think that's something that's very poorly appreciated in the entry levels of this technology, because people enter into it and they get fascinated. They think, okay, cool, I can invoke the spirit. I can access and perform these rituals. And then the neophyte does. But the neophyte, again, hasn't been prepared and they don't have the technology of what happens. And now they get through the honeymoon phase. And the honeymoon phase is when everything is sweet and beautiful, and maybe a light went off and on, or maybe a little colored orb showed up in your vision, or something in your dream was resonant. The sweet stuff, the nice things. Things that still don't pose a threat to your personal model of the universe. And then there's the other side. When you actually get the technology right, when you've practiced the yoga methods and you've woken up Kundalini, and especially that's something that sex magic is very involved in, is triggering that. And as the Kundalini comes up, as the serpent, as the dragon rises within us, the nature of the dragon is fear. It's terror. And people will then fear and they go like, oh, the demon has gotten to me. And that, especially if they come from still a religious program. But in the Bible, it also says that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. So like, which one is it? Is it the devil or is it God that's causing this fear? And it's technically both. And the catch is that once you have moved through this experience into the space of another consciousness, a consciousness that creates reality, or that level of your own consciousness, then you are in the space where thoughts become things. And to be in the space where thought becomes things, the experience of fear is when the energy of the Kundalini hits the cerebellum and it stimulates the various supporting areas of the brain, the amygdala specifically. The stimulation of the amygdala as a result of this, what we call the God part of the brain, creates this fear and this terror that happens in the body. This is very much the exact same way as Timothy Leary wrote about the psychedelic experience in correlation to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That fear is the fear of God. It's the beginning of knowledge. Or more accurately put, it's the beginning of gnosis. And gnosis is this intimate relationship with the divine, which I think finds a correlation Kabbalistically to Da'at, in the sense of its knowledge without understanding. So the thing that causes the fear is we're not familiar with this version of reality we're suddenly starting to experience. I didn't take a drug, so I don't have a reason to have an altered state of consciousness that level. It's dramatic, but it's far more, it may be far more dramatic than what I'm used to, because it can be a lot more intense than a drug. It could appear like your physical world is altering. And these are the intense levels of consciousness that people don't experience. And this is literally what the Bible says again. And it's a funny thing for, I think, an occultist and sometimes a black magician to be quoting the Bible so much. But I would note that some of the best grimoires were also from popes, but playfully saying. But it says there, when you see God, you are no more. And it's because when we're reaching into this region of the unconscious, the centers that contain our personality dissolve. We have no more connection to the frontal lobe. We have dropped this far into trance. And because of that, the experiences that happen at that level are real. They are not real as this microphone or these cameras or anything like that. But in the experience of the practitioner, they are completely real and more powerful. And if the adept doesn't have a foundation on which they can build the sense of certainty that not only will they be fine, but that they still maintain agency, there's a lot of unhealthy things that can happen. Because again, at that level, thoughts become things. So if I hit that level and I think, oh, the demons possessed me, evil's on its way, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to die. You're that close to the hypothalamus from the cerebral inactivity that you can cause communication like that into the body, which can then result quite negatively. And this is why these were the hidden secrets, and they were reserved for initiation. But as long as we're realistic and we're taking the practice, and that's again, some of the things that the book gets you ready for. Might not prep you for that, like put you through that, fortunately, but it makes you ready for, should that day come, that you know what to do when it happens.
Again, makes a lot of sense, and you build that in a really kind of solid way with respect to people in this field that sometimes can really kind of be slightly preachy in that, or also use that kind of metaphor in a way to put themselves in an ivory tower as a teacher. You know what I mean? Whereas I have this hidden knowledge, I have the way. You will be, burnt to a crisp by doing this. Like it's almost an inversion of that principle. And I like what you do, because you're kind of, this is a really bad metaphor, but stay with me for it if we can bear it. But it's like you're training people for a kind of a sporting event. It's like, if you get into the ring with this world champion as you are, you can throw a punch. You got a puncher's chance, but it's not going to happen. You're going to get hurt. Like, you need to train, and this is the program you're going to do. It's the same principles. And I know that's a bit of a crappy metaphor, but
it's true, right?
Yeah, it's the base, the principles. So let's go into kind of I guess some of the areas of the book. Like, I love how you did the work around kind of like the tarot, and then kind of the comparison tables. The bit that really resonated with me, as I mentioned before we kind of hit record, was kind of the descent into the underworld, particularly. I recognized a lot of that. I also, as I said, recognized the reason you've got warnings in that. Which I think is why they kind of hit home. But let's go through that.
I think again, there's like two very, very hot topics that you hit on there. I mean, the one is the tarot, and obviously its correspondences, and then the hero's journey. The journey down the descent. And I think one of the things people again overlook is they pick up a pack of tarot cards, and then they do the classical divination attempts with it, and we forget that this was originally a map of the unconscious. And if we understand that at that level, and we look at the maturing archetypes, which are the elementals that most people overlook, if we look at most traditional orders, there's this chase to get past the elemental initiations and move over into the other areas, almost like it's I got to get through that to get to the good stuff, when that is the good stuff. The elemental components, which we see in tarot, is those the four minor arcana areas, which again shows us the reflection of the tree of life, which again shows us the elemental dimension of ourself as a warrior or huntress, a magician, a lover or artist, and a king or queen, a sovereign, which is purely the psychological manifestation of these more complex archetypal energies, moving from pure unconsciousness into active embodiment. And I think, one of the reasons why I share the tarot there, and I share the aspect of the hero's journey, is to show that this is cyclic, even though we may interpret it from a magical point of view, cyclic to every single human being. It's literally the technology big marketing campaigns are built on, sales and influence systems are built on, great TV series are built on. If you understand that and you look at Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, you'll see the same patterns repeating over and over again. And this is the core legend, the core knowledge, and that's the thing that gets us through that. And the journey of the descent of Inanna, which was an initiation practice inside of the delirious saints, when people were joining in those processes, was one of the fundamental workings. And it's the fact that we're not aware, we're unconscious again, so it's in the shadows, hence the concept of shadow work, of how the planets are currently influencing our model of reality. And a lot of those are doorways that are completely dormant to us. things that we don't want to touch necessarily. We don't want to look at the dark side, and ultimately we don't want to face that what sits at the bottom or the end of that pathway. And we start the journey off quietly, so to speak. We strip away the layers of the personality and the things that holds it safely in place. And again, I love what Joe Dispenza says, and I quote him quite often in the book. Personality creates personal reality, because that's the unconscious thing that sits in the background that runs the program. So when we start to unfurl that and start to open that thing up, there's things that are going to come up at the various different levels, at all 7 levels. But if the adept, I think, can remain focused, all 7 levels are going to reveal the divine and the demonic in attribution to that within their lives. The working is the process that I think micro gets you through it, and then that kickstarts a process in your own life. Or you may have been already on that process in your own life because of natural initiations, and hopefully that kind of gives you a guidance of like the steps, where you might be missing or what you might need to be working on and going back to. But I think the ultimate end of it is still the same. It's the death, right? And it's the death and it's the transmutation. And I love there was a statement by Thomas Carlson where he said, death is a friend who stands at the left shoulder of the magician. And the concept of her being at the left shoulder specifically is really what the elusive key is there. And the elusive key is that instead of fearing death, there is the conscious utilization of death. And when we look at positive thinking movements and stuff like that, we will oftentimes say, no, I should think more positive. I should bring more of this energy into my life. I should focus on the good. And then we try to resist or repress almost the bad and the negative. Whereas to have death on the left-hand side is an indication of the left-hand path, which is the indication of ownership and responsibility, which means the using of death as a force. And again, if we look at dying as people when we age, or we look at cancers, like the cancer is the result of a zombie cell. Right? In many cases, it's a cell that doesn't die when it's supposed to. And the way we hold onto our past, because we're using it as a way to defend our current personality and our current familiar reality, we can death, because we don't invite death, death starts to pull us down with it. We start to age. We start to invite disease. We start to create that the water stops running, and the disease and the infestation starts to begin to appear. So unless we are consciously going to unveil the different planets, which controls our life, and we claim it's someone or something else, we can't get into the letting go of the full core thing that sits at the bottom that has held all these things in place as a defense. Because again, the reason I may say that money is controlled by the global or elite or something like that is because secretly maybe money was a quality of father and father was absent. Or maybe it is me feeling like I'm not enough or smart enough or capable enough, and as such I'd rather make that the enemy. And the result is I build an entire meta frame or version of reality around that. And that's why often when we start this work, the first thing that shows up in the dreams or in the garden when we meditate seems like the devil. It seems like a demon or a monster, or one thing we oftentimes get is an alien-like creature that starts to appear. And this is literally because we have alienated this dimension of ourselves. And that is Ereskichel. That is the queen of death. She's monstrous because it's the part of ourselves that's monstrous that we've kind of shielded and hidden and everything like that. And it's not an easy fight. It's not an easy journey. Hence why the planetary work is usually something that comes after the elemental work, because the sorcerer must be in a place where they're sovereign. In other words, they're willing to take absolute responsibility of their reality, even if they're incorrect. Right? So I love the compliment from you earlier about the kind of mature frame. And it wasn't, if I wrote this book probably any earlier in my life, I might have been a victim to the same thing myself. Right? So we need to get to that space of realizing a king's position or a queen's position is in service. If it's oppression, it's nothing more than infantile grandiosity. And anyone in that will not survive the fires of the dragon within. We have to be the magician. And to be the magician means the air element. It means we are not the slave to our reasoning, because our reasoning is limited to our existing knowledge base. It means that we cannot be the slave to our water, which is the statement of, oh, because I feel like it, or my feelings are guiding me, or things like that. It's the recognition that feelings are generated, right? They can be unconscious, causing the reactive experience. They can be biological, right? Something I ate or drank or did with my body. But in most cases, there is the theory of how emotions are made, or the philosophy around this is that there's very specific tenets on what makes us feel the way we do in different contexts, despite everyone having the same stimulus. It's being the warrior, which means we're not a victim of, I don't want to say cowardice, but we are willing to take action, and we're able to organize our inner world in such a way that postpones the delay, or even postpones the gratification. It is action for action's sake. And we are also then at the space where, so that's it. So it's the king, the ownership. It's the magician. It's not being a victim of reason, but using the intellectual mind to balance things. It's the lover, which is not the addict of emotion. So the, jumping to eating quickly or getting a snack to distract myself, but the channeling of that into art. Marlena Seven-Bremer, who gives a comment in the book, does incredible work in that area for somebody to look into, also around the planets in that context. And then again, the warrior, the not tyrannical component, the not blaming of someone else and saying, why didn't they do this? They're supposed to do that to make me feel a certain way, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to lead by example, right? I'm going to demonstrate what I want. And to come to that space holistically, because I think that's what we find through the journey, through the descent, through the death, is the hard ones that we got to give up, is the responsibility that we place on other people's shoulders. And that doesn't dissolve responsibility from other people in an agreement, but it stops us from playing victim and as such becoming reactive and losing the frame. And ceremonial magicians historically, or magicians or practitioners, we're the witches. We're the practitioner that comes and casts spells over the world and seduces them into a beautiful new version of reality, seduces ourselves into another version of reality so intensely that we're feeling an expertise that becomes a physical reality. So to be in a space where we're not doing that, where we're allowing others to do that, we're making them the kings or queens, we're making them the power over our emotions and our actions and our choices, means we've given up agency. And to find the divine within is not possible when your own agency has been given out to an institution or a group or an individual for the smallest of reasons. And I think it's those micro rituals that's so crucial for us to understand.
Thank you. And you give an anecdote in the book around Mars in particular, and kind of around kind of that type of Mars energy, where I think you were saying you were working in nightclubs at the time. You were having kind of a potential conflict with some, let's say, people who had no problem utilizing some of that Martian energy. From how you described it, could you relay that?
Sure. When I went through that phase, as I mentioned earlier, where I had the break, and one of my first kind of incentives was, I'm going to go test all of these theories and figure out what's actually real and what's just positive thinking. And one of them was, can you put light, you imagine light over yourself and light over your enemies? And that was like one of the things in my challenge list. And in the same time, I was hosting a number of events and parties, and I got partnership in a nightclub, which we quickly built up to quite a high status. And the nightclub was in a position that was a war territory for drugs and security groups, with less classy descriptions, if I can put it as such. And yes, there was an incident where one night, two of these different groups essentially basically were at war with each other. And I was given the ultimatum to either collaborate, or shall we say, which is a polite way of saying sit aside and let them do what they want with the club, or die. And that was essentially the experience. And this was a nice way to test that positive spirituality. And I think one of the things that started happening in my world is I accepted the fundamental view that the inner world does create the outer world. Now, again, I do want to caveat that it's the same as the Maslowian hierarchy of needs. If you are at the bottom end of that hierarchy of needs, in which you're in a state of emotional distress, you're fearful, you're in survival, or any of these things, you do not have access to the portion of the mind that can affect these things. So I understood that as the first kind of position. I went into a space where at first I was angry and I was afraid. I mean, how was I, an individual by myself, going to take on people far bigger, far stronger, far more equipped than I could ever be? And I watched physically some of the violence by some of these people. Some of them were professional killers. And when I was doing this, there was this moment of internal realization that I had to go and say, what's the story within me that gives ground to this? Because again, there is the Zen philosophy. We hear this in the Hakuhuna tradition and every spiritual tradition, as above, so below, as within, so about, that there's something that brings you into that situation. And what is it? And I mentioned already the idea of stress kind of coming up. And as I went in, I found that the story that I held was that there were these people that had power that I couldn't do anything about. They ran the underground. They did all of these different things. And I realized that unconsciously, I held a model that enabled bullying. I held a model that empowered bullies or unhealthy people like that to have agency over me. And I think we do that often. And it was the moment that I started discrediting this model of reality. And it was very simple how I did it. I didn't just try and compete it head on and go, no, I'm strong and they're not, or anything like that. It was a case of where I just recognized the humanity. Each of them, I knew the one person in particularly, he just had a son that was born. The other one at one point actually worked for me while he was doing things behind my back, so to speak. But his wife would phone me once a week in tears because of how afraid she was for the life that he was living and that he was going to be killed. And I was able to connect that these were vulnerable human beings at a certain level, despite what was being seen in my mind. And the moment that gave me the gravity to break away from that version of reality. And as a result, I was able to then utilize the other paradigms to reinforce the frequency or the energy within my being that there is a way to solve this and there is an alternative ending. And instead of highlighting that one way out, I realized what I was doing is I was collapsing. If we live in an infinite quantum field, I was collapsing and committing to one version of reality and not being willing to entertain another one. So I started entertaining alternative versions of reality. I moved myself after releasing the narrative within myself, I was able to open up to alternative possibilities. And yeah, I mean, the ending of the evening was very, very different than what it was exposed to. The first moment of the one that walked in and still pointed out the gun that he had me spontaneously saying something that cracked everybody open. And the entire tone and energy changed. And at the end of the evening, we were talking about each other's vulnerabilities. They were confessing to me things that they weren't confessing to other people. And a big thing is, I don't think this is something that I could just say to everybody. I think a reason that might have worked is because at that time, I was able to have done work upon myself to the level and to the extent where this person, through the shift of my paradigm, had a window open to express this other portion of it. We're so used to making everyone evil or good and put them in those categories that we forget that inside of every man, woman, child, tree, and animal is the entire tree of life and every single one of its sephiroths. And because the observer collapses reality, if we only observe the evil, if we only observe the bad, and I'm not saying we should be blind to it, but if that is all we can see, that is all we can actualize. And that is not something that can be faked. It's something that you have to have in resonance with yourself. So yeah, that's that story.
And what a truly magical one it is. That was very impactful on me, reading that. I think it'll be impactful to many readers. While kind of you tell it in the book, you just relate it now in a kind of a relatively nonchalant way. It's so potent. It's such an amazing example of the theory and teaching in the book. And talk about putting your money where your mouth is in terms of testing your theory.
But that was it, right? Like it's very easy for us to accept things as doctrine.
Yeah.
And not put them in the challenge. And I'm not saying do what I did.
Yes.
In that sense. Like there's easier ways to test these things, but we shouldn't be religious about an idea until we've at least broken it apart and challenged it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. The left shoulder element that you were touching on earlier is fascinating because it does turn up in the folklore as well. You know, it comes up in the folklore as well. The whole thing of like, you know, you throw salt over your left shoulder to blind the devil. You know.
Oh yes.
Yeah, and like what you call it, Crowley, when he was in Cairo and received the Book of the Law, came from over his left shoulder in the corner of the room. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and in the kind of the Arabic world, when they try and determine if there's some kind of spirit interaction, whether it's kind of I mean, there's very kind of binary perception of like it's either Allah or it's evil, kind of, you know, view. But to determine if it's kind of an affliction of jinn, for example, they ask very much kind of like, can you feel anything on the left side of your body? Like it's always kind of like if it's anything on the left side, it's jinn and kind of bad news, as it were. So there's a lot of substance to that folklorically. Yeah,
it's interesting because it also makes me think about like the possible correlation biologically, because I mean, if it's on the left shoulder, if it's on the left side, it's probably the right brain activity, right? That kind of swap over that sometimes happens, and which is a deeper open to the unconscious. So where the information kind of does come through. So that's interesting. It's I don't know if you're familiar with I forget the author, but it's the bicameral mind, the theory of the bicameral mind.
Oh yes, I can't remember the author. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, there's two elements of the book that I don't agree with at all. But in respect to the author, it was written at a time where the understanding of those specific fields was very, very, very limited, especially in areas of hypnosis. But one of the concepts that he speaks about in the idea of the arc of the bicameral period is that at that time, our relationships with these unconscious kingdoms, so to speak, was very transparent. It's almost like we were completely open to everything. And there wasn't artwork that depicted us as individuals either. It's almost as if we only, this concept of a selfie, even in cave paintings, kind of really came after that period. And he points out this relationship to the Greek text and how this indicates this shift of relationship over time to where the God was with you, to where the God spoke through to a specific organ in the body, to the concept of the God being taken out, to it just being this thing in my gut, or like this, you know, I've got a feeling in my gut, I've got something like that. Yeah. And again, like it re-echoes the old classic map of astrology on the human body. That there's we don't look at the somatic field of the body, I think, because we're constantly viewing it from the left brain. So maybe that left shoulder and a little bit of practice in the right brain can get us a little bit further, I think.
Yeah, interesting. I love how you've got that point of biological reference. You know, that's that's a thread through the book. You use that a lot. Well, I suppose kind of more broadly, kind of from I guess an array of fields of science. You kind of back magical theory with it, which I think really works. So it's another nice example of that. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's absolutely flown by. Normally, this is the time where I ask people if they want to follow you, where's the best place to do so? Now we know there is no place to do so.
No place. Well, I mean, there's something. I mean, there's no social media.
Yeah.
In fact, before this call, I deactivated the Instagram and the Facebook, and the YouTube will deactivate during the course of March as we migrate everything over. There is the official website. We are probably going to bar that down a little bit in the next month or two. For the moment, you can still kind of register, and there's programs and stuff on there. But ultimately, the best way to find me at this moment is pick up the book. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles. It should be at a couple of places. So just go search Adam Nox on Amazon. And you'll pick up a copy, and in there is a QR code, and that QR code will take you to whatever channel is active.
Gotcha.
At the time. So if we end up dropping the Call to View site and we just open other channels, that's it. And also with the book, because this book is about 500 pages. The original format was 800 pages.
Jesus.
Yeah.
How long have you been writing this, Adam?
A while. I don't know. It's been a minute. But a lot of those things are in the downloads. There's another 300 pages. And that's stuff like the full correspondence system in association to these different areas. That alone is quite big. That's like almost 200 pages. Right. So that does take out quite a heavy bit. And then there's things in the tarot cards that I took out because they felt like repeating things that other authors have said. I've just added there for conclusion. And inside of it, we talk about the deal with the devil. And we go through those processes of what that ceremony looks like and the pact between the devotee and the master. That contract is in there as well. So, if they do, they can download the full contract. It's like 30 pages. And it's not the exact same one, but it's a very close replica, of what was used in the different orders at that time. So that's pretty much the space of the channel. Otherwise, on that space, if somebody does get in there, I used to make training and things available to people. It now is only going to be available for somebody that has read the book and finished what we call the secret science, which is the program on that website. After that, it opens up to the order and the other things like that. We just want to make sure people are well equipped.
Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. Adam, congratulations on a fabulous book. I really, it's I read a lot of magical books and kind of magical adjacent books. I thought this was superb. I learned an awful lot from it. I really did. I thought it was fantastic. So congratulations on that. I know I'm going to pick up a hard copy. I want to have one in my collection. I think it's fantastic. So congratulations and thank you very much for coming on the Spirit Books.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure and always a great conversation with you. I really appreciate what you're doing, your sincerity, and your own work. I think it's humble, it's honest, and it's a good, very important conversation to have. I mean, there's few lucid authors and thinkers in this space, and you're definitely at the top there. So I really enjoyed it. I'll see you soon.
Fantastic.
Stay.
Wow, what a show that was. That was absolutely fascinating. And I read an awful lot of books, and I have to say this stood out. This was an excellent book. There are a hell of a lot of how-to grimoires out there, how-to magical books mixed with grimoires. And this is one of the better ones. It really is, and it's huge. Like it's a big tome and quite a lot of value for money in my in my opinion. As I said before, there are lots and lots of how-to magical books. Some are better than others, but this one has stood out there. It's in the top 10% in my opinion. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I'm Dara Mason, and you've been listening to the Spirit Box. Take care and talk soon.